chapter 11, and it's that great hall of faith. You all know it. I don't think very many people know the book of Hebrews, especially what we've been doing so far. But almost everybody knows Hebrews 11, right? Yeah? Now, by faith, you all know that because it's been drummed to you on several occasions. But this is what I want to say maybe as a disclaimer to beginning this, just because of some of the feedback that sometimes we receive on the book of Hebrews, especially chapter 11. It tends to mention the giants of faith. And when you see them, I realize it can be very inspiring, but it can also be discouraging. Because you're talking about Kina Abraham, Kina Noah, Moses, David, really the giants of faith. The people who, if you remove out of the Old Testament, really the substance is gone. And so a lot of us tend to feel, I'm not that, I'm just an ordinary human being. I don't have those, big accolades, I don't think I can be part of what, human history is based on, because this is how it seems when you look at these people. But just to say this, that before these people acted on what they believed, they were just ordinary men and women. The reason they entered this book, it is because they chose to believe something that at that time was invisible and even intangible. But based on the actions that proved to them or to God that these people actually take me seriously, we now read about them and they look like these amazing, impossible giants of faith. They were just ordinary people. And we know this. Abraham, before the great act of going to sacrifice Isaac, at one time, he even lied about who his wife is. He said, she's not my wife, she's my sister. Why? Because he was afraid. He wanted to preserve himself. And he says, you're such a beautiful woman. If we go with you into this city, they're going to kill me. Pharaoh will take you as a wife. So they had the same fears. They had the same doubts. We know this about David himself. He had his own issues, But at one point, he stepped up and acted on his faith in a way that today we read about him as a man after God's own heart. It's like everything else that was wrong or ordinary about him was forgotten because he rose to faith and did this one amazing thing that now defines him. Moses, we know he was a scared guy at one point, even violent guy at one point. He killed an Egyptian and even hid him in the sand. And then he ran away. But that's not remembered about him. We remember this Moses standing with a staff and telling the children of Israel, be still and see the deliverance of your God. These people who are coming against you, you will never see them anymore. Just see what the deliverance of the Lord looks like. And they entered the history books because of it. So don't be discouraged by reading about these great men and women of faith. Instead, be encouraged. Know that they were like you and they were like me. And at one point, they made a decision to act on what they already knew, what they already believed. And by this, they proved themselves to be people of faith because they were able to believe God for what he said he could do. So your greatness in terms of being a man or a woman of faith is not that you have a name now, but that you are capable of acting on what you already know. So as even the heavens themselves can take note and say, wow, this is a report she has from the doctors, and yet she has said by faith, I will hold my own baby in my hands because this is a promise of God. Heaven takes note and says, hang on, we need to come through for this girl or for this man or for this woman because they have faith in me. Something else I want to say about the whole story of faith. Faith is not a mystical, magical something that you conjure up within yourself. I have faith. Hussa. You know? let there be. You know, that's not what we're talking about. It's not some magical thing that you conjure up and then some great thing happens. It's none of that. Think about Jesus' description of what faith is. At one time, he and his disciples, they come across a crowd. There's some there, and he's got his kid. His kid has a demon. He's demon possessed. And he says, have mercy on me. You know, this demon comes, it throws my child down sometimes, and it throws him in the fire, other times in water. I'm afraid. Please deliver my son. And then he says something interesting. I took him to your disciples, but they were not able to remove the demon. So Jesus is like, oh, how long shall I put up with this generation? I can't remember the words he used. This unfaithful generation. You know, so he comes, bring the boy to me. He rebukes the demon and it leaves. The disciples are like, how did you do that? So they come in private and ask, why were we not able to deliver this child from the demon? Then he says, it's because you don't have much faith. So it's the quantity of faith. Then Jesus says, no, it's not the quantity of faith. You can look at Luke 17 and also Matthew 17. It's not the amount of faith. If you have faith as little or as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, be removed and cast into the sea, and it shall obey you. For nothing will be impossible with you. What is it teaching? It is not the quantity of faith that you have. It is the object of your faith. Even if it is this little, but the faith is in the Lord Jesus Christ or in the God of heaven, then he can do all things. And because you trust him, then nothing will be impossible with you. Because it's not about you, it's about who you choose to believe in. That's the issue about faith. And you know something? He was also saying something that we all know. We all exercise faith, whether we acknowledge it or not. When you woke up in the morning, you said, I will go to church. That is faith. You don't know that you will go to church. When you got into your vehicle or whatever means you used to do here, there was no guarantee that it's going to start, or that on the way it won't break down, or you have an accident. Yet you have faith that because you intend to come here, you will come. So you even exercise faith in the things that are not the ordinary things that you do every day. You have faith that when you go to sleep today, you will wake up tomorrow. On that basis, you even make preparations and arrangements and appointments for next week and next month. Who told you you will be alive? Nobody did, but you have faith that you will be here and that you will perform the things that you said that you would. So it's not a quantity thing. It is your ability to believe what you already know. But the object of your faith is what will make the difference in terms whether you will be termed a man, a woman of faith or not. So I just want to make those disclaimers at the beginning so that we don't focus on the wrong thing and say, where is this place where we go to fill up? Is there a gas station, sir, where you just fill up the faith that we have so that it's a little bit more? That's not what it is. Somebody was giving an example when we were out on break after the first service. Supposing we got some, high level military intelligence, and we were told, hey, look guys, there's a missile that is locked on Mamlaka Hill, Chapurwaka, okay? It's headed this way, all right? You are the target. So in the next, time to contact will be 3 minutes, okay? Depending on whether or not we believe our source, we'll either evacuate this place in a hurry or say, moving swiftly to the next point, and we are all seated. How we behave here will determine whether we have faith in what we have heard or not, right? If we continue sitting, we'll just say, of course we don't believe what has been said. Maybe the source is even not a credible source, or whatever they are saying is just a hoax. So we continue with our service. But if we received intel that for sure this person is, the source is not just intelligible, but it is also reliable, then all of us would be foolish to continue sitting here when we know that in a few minutes there will be a big explosion, and whoever will be in this vicinity is going to be incinerated. When we are acting on spiritual matters, when we are acting on the promises of God, when we are acting on the warnings of God, what we do with the information that we already have is what determines whether we have faith in God or we do not. Jesus said, "He who loves me will obey my commands." In other words, whoever takes me seriously and acts on what I have said, then they have faith in me. They believe in me. Not just in the blessings that I will give, but in the consequences of disobedience. That's what it actually means. So in a sense, our actions are tied to whether or not we have faith in God or not. And so as we proceed again, don't look at these names and be mesmerized by them. Think about what they did with what they knew that qualified them to the hall of faith. Because they're enumerated in the different exploits that they had. And those exploits determined whether they had faith in this God or not. Surprisingly, one of the things that caused Jesus to stop and make a remark is about a certain Roman centurion who said, "Master, I think my servant is very ill. He lies, at home. He's about to die. Please heal him." And Jesus volunteered. He says, "Fine, let's do this. Let's go." He says, "I am not worthy to receive you in my house, and I'm not good enough to bother you to stop what you're doing. Okay? I'm a man in authority, and I know I can tell this soldier, come, and he comes, that one, go, and he goes. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed." Jesus stopped and said, "Surely I tell you, I have not seen this kind of faith in all of Israel." Never mind the guy was a Gentile. He's a Roman soldier. But he recognized that this is a man of authority, and his authority transcends the physical realm even to the spiritual realm, and that he doesn't have to move from here for my servant to be healed. He just has to say the word, and my servant will be healed. And Jesus was impressed. So he literally stopped on his tracks to take note of the quality of faith that this man has. So sometimes faith might be found in unlikely places, not just among the believers, but even people who do not believe. So then, the author gives us a description of faith. Now, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. And of course, that's where most of us stumble, especially New Testament believers. Because we are not used to a world where we can see and touch and feel and enjoy. We have more faith in the things that we can experience. In fact, experience is a very big thing nowadays. We talk about what we have experienced. If I preach a really good sermon and you feel some goose pimples and that must be true. Never mind the quality of what, or the content of what I might be saying might be inaccurate. Because we place a lot on what we feel, what we touch, what we can see, what we can handle. But now the beginning of faith is intangible, it's invisible. And so in a sense, the author is saying, if you cannot see the invisible, if you cannot believe the impossible, if you cannot attempt the incredible, then you cannot be a man or a woman of faith. Because the starting point of faith is not what you can see and what you can touch. He makes that point. And this description, being sure of what you hope for. Today when we talk about hope, it's not a certainty. When I tell you, I hope you'll come for tea. I'm asking, will you come, will you not? I hope it rains tomorrow. Means I'm not sure. Yet, when the Bible talks about hope, in fact, what the Apostle Paul, if I can find it quickly here, says concerning this. I don't have it here. I think it is in 2 Corinthians, if I'm not wrong. It is in Romans chapter 8. In Romans chapter 8, verse 24. For in this hope we were saved. Okay? See how the word hope is used, all right? It's not, might it happen, might it not happen. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is not hope at all. Now you tell me what that means. So if I can see it, to me that is not hope. That's reality. All right? Hope that is seen is not hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? If you have it, how can you say I'm hoping to have it? No, it's already here. But if we hope for what we do not see or what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. So, when God asks us to hope, He's not saying, keep hoping, I might come, I might not come. If we were saved in the hope that one day we'll be reunited with Christ, that is a certainty. It will happen. Why? Because it's based on the character of a God who does not lie. The only thing is that I have not beheld the hope yet. It's still possessed in my heart as faith. I know God will do it, but it awaits the fulfillment of God's timing. But as for its certainty of happening, it will happen. And so hope is used differently in Scripture than we use it here in our daily vocabulary. Now, faith is being sure of what we hope for. So you are sure of it. So you keep hoping. And certain of what we do not see. Again, this is very countercultural for us. Because we are only sure of what we can see and what we can touch. But what is the biblical perspective about this? Listen to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16 to 18. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory. Of course, we can't see it as yet. That far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes on not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. So biblically, what we see, even though we think this is reality, this is passing away. What we cannot see, what has been promised, what we hope for, is the reality. In fact, this is temporary, that is eternal. What we're experiencing, we can touch, we can see, we can enjoy, will only last for a moment. But that which we cannot yet see, that one will last forever and ever and ever. In other words, compared with what we see right now, this is insignificant compared with what we cannot see. So the beginning of hope then requires a countercultural thinking so that we can engage an invisible God who gives promises that are still in the future but will certainly be realized because they are based on His character, and God does not lie. And when He gives us hope, we know He will perform that. And when the promise is finally fulfilled, then we can rest and know that God has done what He promised to do. This is the reality about faith. And that's why we talk of men of faith or women of faith and men or women who are not of faith. Because it's a way of thinking, it's a way of behaving, it's a way of acting, it's a way of believing that is different from the rest of the world. So then, by faith, again, he's going to tell us this is not ridiculous, because people of faith even believe that what we can see and touch did not come from anything that we can see and touch. So our beginning point is the invisible, the impossible, the incredible. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command so that what is seen was not made from what is visible. So our starting point is intangible. And that intangible, invisible is what creates what is visible and tangible. So even our starting point as men and women of faith is different from the rest of the world. That's why we believe in an intelligent creation. A God who ordered the universe to be what it is today. By faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, he still speaks even though he is dead. So he goes back to the very first sacrifice that was offered. And this is interesting because we do not have a command from the law at this point. The law has not been written. The law was written in the days of Moses. So there is nothing that tells us, thou shalt give an offering to God. Somehow, we believe that between the parents, Adam and Eve, they must have transmitted the need to give an offering to God because it was not legally written, and transmitted this to their children, Cain and Abel. So at one point in the course of their life, they did go before God and give an offering. And if I can read what this says precisely, this is a very important and famous painting because it was done by my granddaughter, so I must keep it very safely. When she becomes a Michelangelo, I might say these are the beginnings. This is where I identified her great talent. So then, what we read in Genesis chapter 4, verse 2 and 5, when the two boys are born, now Abel kept flocks, so he was a shepherd, and Cain worked the soil. He was a farmer. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. We know that this will lead to the first murder. The issue will be very serious. But if you look at Abel is being commended as a man of faith as opposed to Cain. Yet there was no command really saying you will give this kind of an offering. And I don't think the issue is the type of offering that is given, or rather the quality, a flock from the herd as opposed to a crop from the field. Because we know God does accept both, all right? But in the wording, and if I may venture here, it's not overtly stated, but I think the quality of offering might be the issue here. That is offered by faith. Now, Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. The wording on Abel is different. Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. I believe Cain's offering could have been accepted if we read that some of the first fruit of his crop. It just says some of the fruits. But we know the command later on will say the first fruit from your crop or the firstborn from your flock. So, in other words, the statement that says that I trust you, God, that is not just out of the effort of my hands that I have brought forth this that I offer to you, is that I give the first fruit, the best and the first, so that I can say I'm trusting you for the rest of the harvest. Even before I have eaten anything from my crop, I give the first fruit. But there was no word first fruit, it's just some of the crop. But for Abel, he brought the firstborn, the fat portions from the firstborn of his flock. I think the quality of what he offers. And because of that, God is pleased with Abel's offering. And he's commended as a righteous man, one who wants to be right with God. Somehow, this knowledge must have been transmitted to these boys that this is what God requires. And when Cain got angry, God confronted him and he asked him, why are you angry? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted also? So God is saying, I'm not locking you out. Your actions are locking you out. And the fact that God didn't bother to tell him what is right, if you do what is right, it means he already knew what was right, but he didn't do it. And therefore, then he is condemned with God rejecting his gift as God accepts Abel's gift. So so Abel then becomes the first person to display what faith looks like. Okay? And note, the parents are skipped from this hall of fame because of obvious reasons. There's no Adam and there's no Eve over here. Even though they were firstborn of God, privileged to have been born in a sinless world, and completely uncontaminated at creation. And yet they are omitted because they rebelled. They did not exercise faith, for example, when the serpent came and tried to detract them from God's command. The faith that they should have displayed is to reject the offer from Satan and say, God said, therefore we shall not eat of the fruit from that tree, because God already said no. So they are skipped, and Abel, as their secondborn, becomes the first person to be mentioned as a man of faith. Then verse 5, by faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. So again, the pleasing of God is very much attached to the actions, the things that we do that we know that God desires. And there are many, the things that God has said we should do. Even if you just looked at the commandments, love your neighbor as yourself, worship the Lord your God only, and, give generously to the poor, etc., etc. There are things that God has done. And as we act on those things, then we prove to be men or women of faith or not. And when we ignore the things that God has expressly commanded, then we have no faith in him. Or we are saying, I don't have to obey you. In any case, I don't think there are any consequences, good or bad, to obeying your commandments. So God looks and says, then you don't believe in me. So, but Enoch here, the Bible simply says he walked with God and then God took him away. God was pleased with him. So he and Elijah are among the two people who actually never experienced death and were never buried. God just transited them direct from earth to heaven. So he goes on to say, for before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And then he gives a further description of the importance of faith. And without faith, it is impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to him must believe. What? That he exists, even though you can't see him. And that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So again, the point of our faith, our contact to become men or women of faith, is the ability to believe in what we cannot see, and believe that the one that we cannot see, if we seek him, he will even reward us. And there will be tangible results to this almost invisible faith that we have. So by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. So here's Abraham again. Here's Noah, and there's been like a drought forever. They haven't seen any rains, they can't even remember the last time there was any rain. But he goes ahead and starts to build this ark, based on a word that he has received from God, that I'm going to send such a deluge in this earth, it will drown everything. And the only way of salvation is through this ark that I'm asking you to build. And he receives dimensions and directions from God. And as he's building it, of course, nobody can see any water, because faith must not be based on what you see. When you already see it, he says that is not hope at all. But he's hoping to be saved from something that he cannot even see, but based on a word that he's received again from an invisible God, but whom he trusts, not only knows what he's doing, but is capable of executing the judgment that he has threatened. So obviously, he could have gone on and ignored that. There hasn't been rain here, what are you talking about? Or be like the rest of the people. They ridiculed him. They thought he was a madman. What are you doing? Rain, and they would laugh at him. But he continued the structure and he built it. Then one day, the reservoirs of the earth were opened by God, and it rained. And this was a judgment rain. So the reservoirs of the deep, that's what the Bible says, were opened. So water was coming from everywhere. It was coming from underneath, it was coming from above. And for 40 days, 40 nights, the entire earth was covered. And of course, it says he condemned the world. Condemned because through that, the ark was the means of salvation for his day. And whoever was not in the ark was condemned and they died. Why? They were condemned on the basis that they lacked faith in what God had spoken through his servant, Noah. Anybody who found themselves in that ark were saved, the animals. But nobody believed, so only Noah's family was saved through that. The rest of them were condemned because their actions completely displayed the fact that they had no faith in God. They didn't believe he can do what he said he would do. And when it happened, it was too late. In fact, he says, when he got into the ark, when Noah finished the ark and got into the ark, the Lord shut him in. So there was the hand of God that actually closed the door to the ark. It wasn't a physical human action. It was God's action. He shut him in. And then the rains began to pour. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. I said about Abraham, before receiving this, he was just an ordinary man living among the Chaldeans, somewhere in Mesopotamia. Nothing significant, nothing special about him. But his heart had the ability to believe God. And this is difficult because he had no prior experience of God for him to say, oh, he did this, he has done the other. At least we have a record and we have history. He didn't have that. Some of you wonder why he was called a friend of God. It's because in that circumstance, it was almost impossible to believe what God was saying. Because at 75, God calls you. You are an old man. You're a grandfather. He's settled. He's got a life that is going on, etc. And then God doesn't even give him specifics. There's no GPS coordinates. Arise and go to a place I will show you. How assuring is that? Okay, I arise and I go. In fact, leave your country, leave your people, leave your family, leave your home, everything that you have known, and go to a place that I will show you. You would need more tangible evidence, isn't it? But the fact that he arose and started the journey, that was remarkable even to God. And then at one point, he's walked with God, and he's going around, he's saying, this is my sister, he's bent on self-survival. Then he goes, and everywhere he's going, God is starting to prove himself, rather, he can be believed, he's a blesser. And at one point, he really becomes a very wealthy guy. And then God comes to him and says, Abraham, don't worry. I am your great and exceedingly good reward. Then he asks God, what will you give me? What can you give me, seeing that you've denied me a son? And this guy, Eliezer from Damascus, my servant, will be heir to my estate. Anything that you give me, it fades in comparison with what I really, really want. That is an heir. And then God says, don't worry, Abraham. Even that I've taken care of. This guy will not be your inheritor. A son coming from your own body, your own flesh, will be your heir. Wow. Then he says, come out. Look up at the sky. Count the stars, if indeed you can be able to count them. So shall your offspring be. Immediately the Bible says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. The ability to believe the impossible, if you like. Because at that point, what reason does a man who is in his 70s, probably in his 80s at this time, have to believe that his children at this late age can be as numerous as the stars in the sky? It's an incredible promise. And then, even then, the Bible will then say his body was as good as dead. They are past the age of childbearing. And then the promise doesn't even come immediately. We know that somewhere in between there is a plan B, and Sarah will come to him and say, hey, let's be realistic here. God has kept us from having a child. At least maybe you can try. Go to Hagar. Maybe we can raise a lineage through Hagar. And they go and they get Ishmael. And yet, God says, that's not the child of promise. It's a child coming from your own flesh, but also a child that you'll have with Sarah. The child of promise. By the time that kid is coming, Abraham is already 99 years old. You'd think at 75 it's late, so God, hurry, But no, he waits until by the time the kid is born, the guy has clocked 100. And he believes God, that God will do this incredible, impossible thing, and that his children will be as numerous as the stars in the sky. Note this. Because God has given a promise, Abraham has real hope. And this hope is, might it happen? Might it not happen? It will happen. It's based on the character of God. God does not lie. So that the fulfillment of the promise itself now comes full circle to God can be trusted. He will perform the promise that he gave. But in the lifetime of Abraham, he only has Isaac. There are no children as numerous as the stars in the sky. In fact, that will await not just one generation, but 2 other generations. Because Isaac will come, and Isaac will only have Esau and Jacob. And then Jacob, in his days, will have the 12 patriarchs. You know, the 12 tribes of Israel will be born out of Jacob. And then they'll go into Egypt. And then in the days to come, when they fall into slavery, that's where in Egypt, in Goshen, that's where Israel will become a nation. So even though God has given a promise, it doesn't mean that he has to fulfill it in our time. It will happen. It is a certainty. But in terms of the fulfillment of the promise, that awaits the fulfillment of God's own timing according to his great plan. Will the children be Abraham's? Yes, they will. In fact, the entire lineage of Israel traces its ancestry back to Abraham. Today, the nation of Israel still exists as numerous as the stars in the sky. Not just decades after, not even centuries, millennia afterwards, after the promise given to Abraham, God still fulfills his promise. And that nation cannot be eliminated, and many have tried. Hitler, 6 million Jews exterminated during World War II, and numerous other attempts in the past by different regimes, all the way from the Assyrians, all the way to the different, the Babylonians, the captivities. But the nation just refuses to die. It cannot, because the promise is based on what God said. And if God has given a promise, he will perform it.
Nitakungoja Yesu, nitakungoja, 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 ninakungoja Yesu.